It's point 5, the eyewitness crowds. It wasn't just one drunk guy at the pub who claimed he saw Jesus, or 2 friends sharing some grief-fueled hallucination. Literally hundreds saw Jesus after he died.
Oh, really? This is an interesting little tidbit. Can you name those people for me? I mean, we're talking hundreds of people now. We should have hundreds of names of people that wrote shit down or that shit was written about their experience. We should have hundreds of names that we can mention, right? But we don't. All we have are a few names of people that supposedly got visited by Jesus. That's all we got. We got Paul, we got Peter, and we might have 1 or 2 other apostles. That's it. That's all we got. Of course, Paul is the one that he's getting his hundreds of witnesses from. It's the 500 witnesses in the Pauline Creed. But the fact is that we cannot say who those 500 people were. So there's literally no way for us to know who exactly saw what and what they saw.
One report says 500 saw him together at the same time. In law courts, 1 eyewitness is helpful, 10 is compelling, but hundreds of first-hand eyewitness testimony puts things beyond reasonable doubt. Most of the history we treat as reliable is based on 1 or 2 sources. By contrast, we have an avalanche of data on the resurrection written down and then circulated at the time of the events.
We simply do not have much written about the resurrection at the time of the events. Actually, literally nothing at the time of the events happening. It only occurs much later, like 20 or so years, which is still good for historical information. Don't get me wrong. It's still good. But to say that it was written down at the time that it was happening is completely false. But also, all you have is a claim of hundreds of witnesses. I mean, if you were to get up into court and claim that hundreds of people saw this happen, and you didn't produce those witnesses, you didn't name those witnesses, you don't have any kind of written accounts by these witnesses, then you have nothing. All you have is a bullshit claim that hundreds of people saw something, and that's all you got. So no, you're really overplaying how much information was written down about the resurrection. He is counting like all of the different sources that come after Paul, and far after all of these traditions had more than enough time to develop legendary aspects to them. So it really makes no sense to pile on all of this extra information when really you just have one source. You have Paul. Paul is literally our only source about Jesus that we have.
Number 6, the surprised faces. The accounts make clear that Jesus' followers hadn't planned this. They weren't prepared for this. When Jesus rose, Mary was at the tomb looking for dead Jesus. The disciples were off crying over dead Jesus, thinking they believed a lie. And they were just as used to death as you and me, probably more so culturally. They knew dead people didn't come back. They thought it was over.
Okay, this is all information contained within the Gospels. The Gospels are not history. So this point is pointless because you can't use the Gospels in order to prove anything about Jesus because we can't discern what in the Gospels are history and what's legend or what's myth or what was just made up by the author. And even then, you've only got one gospel that reports anything, and that gospel only has the women coming to the tomb, finding it empty, and then running the fucketh away. That's it. No post-resurrection appearances at all. Just an empty tomb. But even then, Mark's account is based on Paul's account and the other traditions surrounding Paul. So that's not even an independent source. You have to use independent sources for these things. If you're gonna say shit like, oh, they had surprised faces. None of them expected him to rise again. Why wouldn't they? Even in Mark, Jesus literally says that he is going to resurrect. He tells them that he's gonna do it. There's no reason for them to think that he's dead, or at least no reason to think that he's not going to resurrect. Of course, all of that is just an element of the story. That element being that the disciples, who are representative of the tribes of Israel, are dipshits. And they have always been dipshits. In the Old Testament, dipshits. And so that's representative of their dipshittery.
Number 7, the burning stakes. You know, as news spread around, Emperor Nero began executing Christians. Records describe grotesque torture, being torn apart by dogs, being burnt alive at stakes. All they had to do to avoid this fate was deny Jesus. But they didn't. They were fearless. Deny the resurrection or we'll set you on fire. Well, I saw what I saw, so light me up. They were praying in prison. They were singing whilst burning at the stake. Supposedly Peter asked to be crucified upside down. Whatever people saw, clearly it was worth giving their lives for. These are remarkably reliable witnesses who had nothing to gain but torture and death. Nobody got rich. They died for what they saw.
Okay, so this right here assumes that the original people that quote unquote witnessed the resurrection are the ones that are dying and being torn apart by dogs and burning on stakes and all this other stuff. That's not actually true. While he does mention Peter being crucified upside down, Peter was only ever, for as far as the evidence shows, an apostle, which means that he just got a revelation of Jesus. And that's it. He didn't actually see Jesus resurrect from the dead or experience any kind of like actual physical Jesus. He just got a vision of Jesus. So the people that were dying for the faith at that particular point were so far removed from the originators of the Christian cult that those people believed completely in the faith. And to say that they were persecuted because they wouldn't renounce the resurrection specifically is a bit misleading, because they were persecuted just for being part of a different group. That's it. Like, it's not about renouncing the faith or anything like that. Like, even if you look into Pliny, the thing that he was concerned with was the Christians still paying homage to the Roman gods. Like, that's what he was concerned about. And even then, there was no real reason to persecute the Christians. It kind of seems to me like you're twisting this a little bit. You're twisting the information to make it seem like the Christians were more persecuted than they actually were for, reasons that weren't the actual reasons. Also, the originators of the cult's Christianity were not the ones that were being persecuted in those fashions. I don't know what happened to the originators of it. Obviously, Paul was hunting a bunch of Christians before he turned into a Christian. But the fact is that the originators of the cult were not the ones being attacked by dogs.